Hello everybody and welcome to a very special episode of Nathan on Shuffle. I'm Nathan and I'm here to share my top 16 albums of 2021 with you guys. I've been super excited to do this. This has been something I've been thinking about all through the year, and I love all the shows where people count down their top albums of the year. It's a great way to find out people's tastes, but to also get some great recommendations of albums that may have been missed throughout the year. So to me, it's one of my favorite times of the year for music shows and for people, you know, giving their lists and their opinions. And so I was excited that this is the first year I can really participate in it, since this is the first year of my channel. And it's been a fun year, and so I thought I'd do something a little bit different. I'm kind of doing something a bit experimental with my top 16. I've teased it a little bit throughout my prior videos, but I thought what could be fun, because everyone just kind of lists out their top albums from bottom to top. And, you know, I enjoy that. I think that's really a fun format, and I like doing that too. In fact, in my last video where I talked about favorite albums, I went from 40 to 17 in order, you know, one after the other, which I thought was really fun. But I thought it would be interesting to switch it up a little bit and do something a bit different. So I thought, why not do kind of an album tournament? It's hard for me to rank these anyways, so I thought this could be a fun way to kind of decide on the fly, like how these should be ranked and what order they should come in. And so I thought it would be fun. If that's not for you, if you think it's kind of gimmicky and silly, I don't know. You could just kind of listen to my explanations of each of the albums and then move on from there. You don't have to like go through all the battles between the different brackets and things. But I think it's a lot of fun. You know, it's a lot of fun to do and to plan. So this is my board. My wife kind of helped me create a board of all the different albums and where they'd go. So you kind of get a spoiler alert of what my top 16 are there through these little pictures, but I'll go in more depth, obviously, and pick out the winners as I go through each of the brackets. So, and I'll put in the description a more traditional list of albums in my rough order of how I felt about them. So if you're more into that and more into the list style, you can look in the description and get a sense of my list. But just trying to do something a little bit fun and creative as we approach the end of the year here. So first matchup we've got here. So I wanted to talk about this matchup, Dream Theater, A View from the Top of the World. This is a fantastic album from Dream Theater. They're one of my favorite groups, and I thought this was really kind of a return to form. You know, there's been a bit of variable quality maybe throughout the Mangini era. Some albums have hit harder than others, and they've kind of been trying to find their footing in this like later stage of their career. And I think this is a great example of what Dream Theater do best. It's just them doing what they want to do. They didn't come into the studio with any preconceptions. They just went full on prog. It's heavy, it's prog. There's no ballads. There's no real pop elements on this very much. It's just really hard hitting and proggy, and there's a big epic, and it's just a lot of fun. So that was definitely one of my favorites of the year. The other one in this bracket is more of a lesser known choice. This is Turbulence and their album Frontal. This is a band from Lebanon. This is heavy progressive metal as well. But it's more, it has some of the same elements, like a lot of that Dream Theater type vibe, but also a bit of Haken in the kind of the eccentric nature of some of the songs here on display. It's a little bit of a concept album about Phineas Gage. So it's kind of cool how it's constructed, and it just came out of nowhere for me. And you'll see oftentimes like that factors into my decisions about what I move forward and don't. Like when it's an established band that I love, did they really break the mold and do something like in the top levels of what they do? Or is it a new band that kind of came out of nowhere and really surprised me? That surprise factor and discovery of a new band plays a role as well and may impact my choice. But in this decision between these two albums, I'm going to move on Dream Theater, because I think it's the better record of the two for me. It has better production values. It shows a band kind of at their prime. You know, Dream Theater is hard to top, and when it comes to musicianship and just the quality that they have in their releases. And I just thought it was a really strong album from the group that kind of is a bit of a return to form after a couple of albums that, may or may not have hit as hard in various ways. And Turbulence is excellent. They did a great, strong album here that kind of came out of nowhere for me. And I haven't heard talked about a lot, so I did want to bring attention to it. But I do think the Dream Theater just edges it out a little bit in my estimation. So let me put up the Dream Theater. All right, so Dream Theater moves on in that first battle. So next we have the next pair of albums here. And this is going to be a little bit loose and fun. I'm trying to just have fun with it. So hopefully you'll excuse my trying to gather things and all that kind of thing. But we have this album. This is Mir, Plain House. Once again, a great new discovery, a band that I hadn't heard of before. I believe they have an album prior to this one that I just skipped my radar. I just didn't know about. But this album is what really hooked me onto the group. That they're just really cool. It's almost hard to describe their style. It's like there's elements of this kind of chamber pop style, but there's progginess baked into it as well. There's male and female vocals. They have almost an indie rock kind of vibe a little bit to them, but I like the instrumentation that they have some almost classical instruments in the mix with some violin and these kind of sweet piano that permeates throughout that you might hear in more of a classical setting, but it works well in this kind of indie rock / prog kind of world. And I think it just really, the minute I heard it, just really captured me in a way that I wasn't expecting. So really highly thought of that album. It's really a great one. The other one that it's up against is a newer album. This is Ross Jennings, A Shadow of My Future Self. I don't have the physical copy of this yet. I have it on order, but I ordered it on vinyl and I think it's a little bit delayed. So unfortunately can't show that one off here. But I really adore this album. This is the Haken frontman, Ross Jennings, and this is his solo project. And it's not very overtly progressive, which I think plays in its favor. It's very diverse in its influences. There's kind of a Crosby, Stills, and Nash vibe in certain sections, which is kind of a portent of what's to come on the Morse, DiVirgilio Morse Jennings album to come next year. But there's also some jazzy vibes in some of the tracks. There's some funkiness in the mix. There's almost a country-ish flavor to some of the things. There's a little bit of a prog influence, especially on Phoenix. There's some Pink Floyd kind of atmospheric stuff on Grounded. It's really well done. It has a lot of variety. It's a long album, but you never feel bored with it because there's just elements of pop and indie and rock and 80s. And it goes and runs the gamut. It's just a really cool record that I think really showcases Ross and his personality and really separates him from the Haken stuff, which is, of course, very heavy and very progressive. So this was a tough battle because these are great records and they're both kind of skirting the line. Are they really prog? But I didn't really come on, this isn't purely prog, really. Most of these are prog or prog related, obviously, and I think all would appeal to a prog audience because that's what I love. But I didn't come in here saying, it has to be super proggy to be the winners here. It's just, what are my favorites? What really captivated me as a listener? And to me, that is Mir, Plain House. Just incredible record. I love every piece on it. I think it's really masterfully done. It's really one that everyone should check out who has similar tastes to me. I really adored it, and I thought it was such a standout for the year. And Ross Jennings did an incredible job with his solo album. I think it's a great one, and it shows some promise of what's to come for him as an artist. And I can't wait to follow his career, and I'll definitely be picking up his next solo album whenever it may drop. But I think Mir kind of edges it out in this case. All right, so next we move on to a very interesting battle here. This is Neil Morse Band and Innocence in Danger, of course, highly talked about on the channel. I'm kind of a Neil Morse obsessive, as everyone should know by now. He's my favorite artist. He's always connected with me in a way beyond any other artist. It's just it's hard for me to even compare him to other things because he just writes the music that speaks to me. And this new album is really, really great. It's 2 discs, so there's a lot of material to like here. The first disc is more of the shorter, poppier stuff. Of course, when you say poppy in terms of Neil Morse Band, there's still a lot of progginess on display, especially on, the couple of opening tracks, Do It All Again, Bird on a Wire, and then the big kind of epic cover version of Bridge Over Troubled Water that closes the first disc. But to me, the real meat of the album, the great stuff that just I'm in total love with is the second disc, which houses the two major epics, Not Afraid Part 2 and Beyond the Years, which are just fantastic, run the gamut of all the things Neal Morse is known for, but also adds some fresh flavors. I think Beyond the Years was largely put together by Bill Hubauer, who infuses a lot of his sound into the group. I like how the band just keeps getting more and more collaborative and like bringing in all these separate influences from the different band members, from Eric Gillette and Bill Hubauer, like I mentioned, and even Randy George brings a lot to the table in the songwriting department. And Mike Portnoy, of course, kind of has the genius brain to put it all together and arrange it in a great fashion. So really strong album that I loved. And it's up against Hasse Froberg, a musical companion, the album We Are the Truth, which is a new album to me. This came out very recently. I didn't even get around to doing a solo album review of it. Most of these, I wanted to mention that as well. Most of these have solo reviews where you can go see my thoughts in more depth. I'm trying to be more brief here, but of course I end up talking a lot. But I didn't get around to doing Hasse Froberg. Of course, Hasse Froberg is a member of the Flower Kings. His voice has been such an important piece of the band there. But he comes into his own here as kind of more of a solo artist. And he's been doing these albums for a little while. There's a few of them that have been released, so this isn't the first foray for Hasse Froberg and the musical companion. But I think it's the best one they've done. They keep refining and doing better in their sound, They have this interesting blend because there's definitely a piece of that Flower Kings type sound, but there's more of like a classic rock edge to me, more of like standard rock in here and less prog than what you see with the Flower Kings, but it's still there. There's still touchstones of prog, but they also infuse different other styles, stuff that's more in a jazzy way or stuff that's a little bit more funky at times. They try to infuse these different musical styles and things. I heard someone describe it as Scandinavian soul. There's a lot of soulful playing and singing. It's a really well done record that I think really plays to their strengths, has so many beautiful moments, and just really skirts that line well between, classic rock and some of the prog stuff that I like, the symphonic prog, with little touches of unique elements thrown in. So really was impressed with this album, enough to kind of sneak it on my list at the last minute and replace a couple other things that I was considering. But I think it deserves its spot here. I think it's a really great album that you guys should check out if you haven't heard yet, especially if you like Flower Kings and those types of bands, the symphonic prog of the modern age. So but between these two, I think it's a fairly obvious pick for me. As much as I love the Hasse Froberg record and think it's great, it's hard to top Neal Morse band. I think they're really firing on all cylinders. The album shows the band really gelling together. All the tracks are just magical in their own way. And I love the epic so much. It's some of my favorite music that came out this year. So have to give the nod to the Neal Morse band on this one. All right, so next we have a really interesting battle that is kind of a difficult one. But first we've got Liquid Tension Experiment and their third album, just Liquid Tension Experiment 3. And I have the big deluxe box set, so I just kind of pulled out the individual vinyl here for the purposes of showing it off here. This is, of course, a return for the magical instrumental progressive group that's really released some fantastic stuff, back almost over 10 years ago, I believe now. This is, of course, Mike Portnoy, John Petrucci, Jordan Rudess, and then Tony Levin on bass. And it's notable because Mike Portnoy obviously left Dream Theater quite some time ago, so it's one of the first projects that really unites the core kind of members of Dream Theater back together in a sense. So it's a little bit of a reuniting. I believe Mike Portnoy and John Petrucci played together on John Petrucci's latest solo album, so that was kind of their first recording together since the breakup. But this is the second one, and it's really excellently done. They really do not miss a step from the earlier albums. It's really incredibly done. All the playing is great. There's some epic pieces on it. I love the Rhapsody in Blue piece of music. They played it live back in the day in LA, and so it was cool to see that brought into a studio version, and I just absolutely adore it. And so this is an incredible record. Their playing is off the chain. They're just really great, and I really appreciate it. Even as a person who doesn't really love just purely instrumental music, I tend to like vocals more so. I think they're an important piece of music for me. But I do respect what they're doing here, and they really do a great job of having a lot of catchy, hooky melodies anyways in the makes that kind of keep you engaged and keep this a fun, cool listen. The other one that it's up against is Aphelion by Leprous. And this is another great record. Obviously, they're all great records. I don't need to say that. But Leprous is well known for kind of a darker prog, I would say. And these newer records that they've done aren't as heavy, aren't as like proggy in a sense. You know, they don't have a lot of super complexity and craziness that some of the earlier records had. They're kind of getting into more of a atmospheric, moodier place with their music. And I'm kind of digging it personally. I really liked the last album that they did as well, Pitfalls, and this falls in line with that as well. Just incredible singing. The singing is just such a highlight. There's so many great moments where the voice is just soaring and you could feel the emotion and the pain in the vocals. I love how there's a lot of like funkiness in the musicianship that really is interesting to me. It really brings it to another level. I kind of like that feel. You know, a lot of tracks kind of start out a little bit slow, but then they explode in this big, like, emotional heavyweight moment. And then the band kind of kicks in with just some really cool grooves. And so it's just a really fabulous record, kind of dealing with some darker subject matters, dealing kind of with depression and darkness and things of that nature. But I just really felt that it was just really well done and really artistic in its execution. I just really loved it and think there's so many great moments on it that really stood out. So it's a band that's really rising in my estimation, making me realize that I need to delve into their back catalog a little bit more. So for this battle, I'm going to give the edge to Leprous. You know, I didn't anticipate that when I set this bracket, but I think that's the choice here because just the emotion and just the nature of the music, and I love the vocals. They just bring it to another level. There's so many big heights, and there's so many just great, incredible moments. The Liquid Tension is solid throughout and is really great, but I do miss a bit of vocals on it, and I do feel a bit fatigued by the end, just having this kind of onslaught of musical complexity just coming at me. So I think the Leprous record just makes for a better listen overall. But I love Liquid Tension, don't get me wrong. And like I said, Rhapsody in Blue is one of my favorite tracks of the year. So, but definitely, like I said, these are going to be close races, but I'm just kind of going with my gut a little bit. And I think I'm going to stick with Leprous on this one. All right, so now we get to the other side of the board here with a couple really cool releases. This is Stixx, Crash of the Crown, which really surprised me as well, because I'm not really all that much of a Stixx fan, really. I mean, I like some of their 70s material, you know, some of the big classics and the big hits, but I didn't know what to expect from this record, but I heard a lot of good vibes about it, a lot of good, like, people commenting that it's really a strong record, so I gave it a shot. And I agree, I just think it's really, really well done. I think it's really great that this legacy band from like back in the 70s can come out with such a strong album. It kind of gives me a feel of like some of the newer prog stuff, like something like Spocksbeard would do. It kind of has that feel and vibe to it, but, you know, still kind of sticks in this lane of classic rock and pomp rock, kind of like the 70s stuff you'd expect from the group as well. So it's a great blend, and it's kind of interestingly structured. It has a lot of really shorter tracks, but there's a lot of them, but it kind of breezes by. It's a quick listen. Every song is really strong. There's just no moments where I'm just bored with it. It's just really breezy and fun, and just a really cool album that I really enjoyed this year, and is probably my favorite, you know, newer album by a classic band for the year. So I think that says a lot for its strengths. So really, really an incredible album that I really loved. And it's going up against Transatlantic, The Absolute Universe. Now, this was a little bit tricky for me to figure out how to assess this one, because as many of you know, this is a big package of music. I have the ultimate makes, I guess is what it is. The ultimate version of it, you know, with all of the bells and whistles. There's 2 different versions of the album, really 3 versions of the album if you want to get technical. There's the Breath of Life version that Neil Morse kind of spearheaded. There's this Forevermore version that Rona Stoltz spearheaded. And then there's the ultimate 5.1 makes edition that kind of combines the 2. But they did something really fascinating here by creating two different versions of the same album, essentially. And they're not just like, well, one's a shorter cut of the bigger one. There's a lot of differences that make them different. There's certain songs that are on one but not the other, obviously. There's different cuts of certain things. Different vocalists are featured on this one versus that one. This one has different lyrics than that one. This one has a slightly different vocal melody than this version of the song on that album. So they really embrace this idea of highlighting all these differences and creating two different albums, but it makes it hard for me to place it. Like, do I just focus on one version? Do I consider the whole package one version? And does that give it an unfair advantage, or does it give it an unfair disadvantage? It's hard to say. I kind of, throughout my listening, I'm kind of focusing on the Forevermore version, because that's the one I tend to listen to more, just because it has more material, has some songs that I really love that aren't on the Breath of Life version. But you could argue that the Breath of Life version is more compact and maybe is a better package as an album that cuts out some of the things that may be a bit overly excessive, where this version, Forevermore, can feel a bit long. But I like that, I like long albums, I like stuff. So anyways, that's probably way too much to talk about. But so for the purposes of this, I'm kind of listening to the Forevermore version and judging it. And it's just a fantastic record. I mean, Transatlantic never misses for me. It's a super group with all of these musicians. I love the original bands that they're from. And these musicians are just iconic to me in my modern prog love. And I think they came together and made a really great record. It's a concept record where the songs kind of lead from one to the next. There's no real weak moments. Every song is strong. It's a really great record that kind of stands up somehow amongst some of their greatest material, which is amongst my favorite albums of all time. Bridge Across Forever and The Whirlwind. This feels like a little bit of a sequel to The Whirlwind. It's not totally meant to be that, but it's a little bit what they call a spiritual sequel to it. So it brings back those vibes that are really strong for me. So just a lot to say about this one, but I love it. It's just them doing what they do best. And it was really ambitious of them to create this big work and have different versions and different varieties. So I have to give them kudos for that. And so I'm going to move on Transatlantic in this case. Stixx is great. They had a great album that I strongly recommend, and I think you guys should check out. I'm sure many of you have heard it. But I think Transatlantic is the stronger one here. And I really, really loved the album this year. So maybe a bit of a predictable choice. I've seen it top a lot of people's year-end lists. And I'm like, oh, people are going to be like, oh, another Transatlantic, win. But, I just have to go with what I feel is right and what makes the most sense for me. So Transatlantic moves on. All right, so next battle, we've got Steven Wilson, The Future Bites. So this is an interesting record, and I know there was maybe a bit of controversy for some people that felt like this record was a bit too much in the pop direction for Steven Wilson. He was kind of heading that way in his previous record, To the Bone, and this one embraces it even more so. So it's a very pop-centric record, very light on prog elements, but I think they're there if you search for them. So a lot of people didn't like that, but I do like it. I think it's a really great record. It sounds really great. The production is strong. It has a lot of great songs with great hooky, catchy melodies that I really loved throughout the year, that really stuck with me in a big way. So I can't fault the album for being a little bit poppy, because it's just an enjoyable record. I don't worry too much about the genre labels and, oh, I wish he was more proggy. I have Hand Cannot Erase and Raven Who Refused to Sing if I want to pull out a more proggy Steven Wilson record. But I think he's a very singular artist who has a very specific vision, and I'm willing to let him go with his vision, and I'm there to follow it. So, and next year it looks like there's going to be a new Porcupine Tree record, so you'll get more of that traditional Steven Wilson prog kind of sound through that record. But I think in this case he made a really strong pop album that I really loved, and I think is just sonically really interesting, has a lot of great ear candy is kind of how I think about it. A lot of great sounds and great melodies, and I just thought it was really well crafted and really a strong record. It's going up against Frost and their album Day and Age, Great record. I really love this. I love Frost. They're one of my favorite groups, and every album they've done has been fantastic, and this is no exception. They're such a great band because they do stuff that sounds really fresh and modern. You know, a lot of this prog can sound a bit dated. Perhaps you could say, oh, it sounds too much like 70s music, which I like personally. You know, I like those influences, but I feel like what Frost does that kind of sets them apart is they bring a more modern aesthetic to their sound. You know, there's definitely some influences from those older styles, and I think there's even kind of an 80s style influence in a lot of their sound. But they bring it into a modern age with some modern production and some modern sensibilities, and I think it works well, and I think it works well with the subject matter, that it's a very modern feel of an album with just the way they talk about kind of our modern world and the kind of the issues we're dealing with. So I just really appreciated this album. I think it's super strong. I really like all the tracks on it. Day and Age to open the album is just a fantastic one. It's a really interesting record because there aren't many like big solos, you know, that you might expect, like big guitar and synth solos, but they kind of purposefully did that and just really focused on the music and building arrangements and really building this kind of complexity of sound, and I just think it really works well. I love Kill the Orchestra as one of my favorite tracks of the year. I just think that's such a great track, and it brings back elements from previous tracks. And so it just has a very singular feel that it's a bit darker, but in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. You know, they still infuse a little bit of humor and lightness in certain ways. But I think it's a really cool record. I think it's a great blend of John Mitchell and Jim Godfrey, who I feel like are kind of the captains of the ship. Some great guest drumming on board. So it's a great record, and I think you could probably get the sense of what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with Frost, Day and Age in this battle. I think it's the stronger record. As much as I appreciate Steven Wilson, I do also like the prog stuff probably a bit better than this, but I do like the production values. It's a strong album that I think deserves some recognition. So I'm glad it's part of my top 16. It deserves its place, but Frost, Day and Age just takes the cake. It's a fantastic record. Definitely highly recommended to all of you guys. So just a really brilliant record that I think deserves spotlighting. All right, so transition. Of course, I filmed this on a different day. I have a different shirt on, different haircut, but I wanted to continue on with the brackets. This next one's a really interesting bracket that I wanted to get into. So the first one we've got here is this album. This is A Hungry Heart by Smalltape. Kind of an interesting choice that really spoke to me this year. It's an artist from Germany. This is mainly a solo project by a man, Philip Nesbital, who's kind of a multi-instrumentalist and very creative and a great songwriter. And this just album really captured my attention. You know, it came kind of out of nowhere. It wasn't one that was super on my radar, but when I heard it, it really connected with me. It has a lot of really interesting qualities to it. It has kind of a jazzy feel to some of it. It has kind of an orchestral feel to parts of it. There's lots of different instrumentation from strings to saxophone and a good like variety of different kinds of tracks here. Some that are more in a poppier vein, some that are more proggy, some more atmospheric. There's some kind of instrumentals. There's a big prog epic basically at the end that goes through several different moods and movements, and it feels very modern and very fresh and very different than the majority of the stuff I listen to, so it kind of stood out to me. Just a really creative, great artist that I think is kind of a rising star in the music scene. Just great. I believe he's also kind of a producer or works with production and works in the studio, so the sound quality is really excellent as well and brings on a good host of guests and different people to fill out the sound. So a really great one there. And it's going up against Caligonaut, Magnified as Giants, which is a really great record that came out this year that I featured quite a bit in some of my videos kind of earlier on. This is a great Norwegian kind of prog outfit that I really like. And one of the things that drew me in was that it has the several members of Wobbler are contributing, so you can hear their vocals and kind of a little bit of the flavor of their style, but it's kind of separate from Wobbler also. You know, it has its own feel and its own vibe. There's only 4 tracks. There's a lot of lengthy kind of proggy epics on it. kind of has that classic symphonic kind of 70s feel to it. A lot of it is kind of laid back and more pastoral and more kind of, not too heavy or aggressive, but it really is beautiful. There's lots of beautiful sections, great melodies, great playing. Just really has it all. It's really a great recommended prog record if you like that kind of style. I've been really kind of obsessed with Wobbler lately, so that really is what drew me in and was really exciting to hear. So between these two, this is a really close one. I wasn't quite sure where to go for a while, but I think I'm going to give the edge to Smalltape on this one. The Hungry Heart, really close, like I said. There's really no fault here for Magnified as Giants. I just connected a little bit more with the Smalltape one. I feel like there's more of a depth and more of a variety. Magnified as Giants record, as good as it is, sometimes it feels a little bit like it's meandering and has a little bit of kind of this lightness to it where I wish there was a little bit more bite and excitement. There is a bit of it throughout, especially on the final kind of big epic track, but I feel like I wish there was a little more, whereas the Hungry Heart really has a uniqueness and has some really clever things going on that I think makes it rise a little bit up. But like I said, really close, but I'm going to give the edge to Smalltape on this one. So the next battle, this is a really great pairing here as well in this bracket. So we've got kind of a classic to me. This is Big Big Train and their latest album, Common Ground, which this channel has talked a lot about Big Big Train. They've been one of the biggest featured bands, I'd say, throughout the year on the channel, and this was a great album that came out like earlier, kind of more in the summertime. I really connected with it. I love Big Big Train. I love their sound. They just have this great vibe that's so them. They have this kind of classic symphonic prog sound that's very beautiful and very nostalgic, and it really evokes emotions, and they really touch me in a deep way. I just really appreciate the music, and it was kind of a cool album because it's basically kind of a product of the lockdown. There's a lot of themes on it about the lockdown, especially in Strangest Times, but the band kind of had an interesting transformation throughout the pandemic where they lost several members. They kind of came together as this core group of 4 members and crafted this album, and I think there was more collaboration between the members. Usually the songwriting comes from Greg Spotton and David Lungden, but this brought in a lot more writing from Nicky Virgilio and Rickard Sojblom. And because of that, there was kind of a new breath of life to it to me. There was new influences, and it brought kind of a freshness to the group. Some people didn't like that. They like more of the classic Big Big Train sound, but I feel like you kind of get best of both worlds here. You get the classic Big Big Train sound, especially in the second half of the record, with like the Atlantic Cable epic and end notes and all of that stuff. But then you also get the beginning tracks, which are a little bit more experimental, a little bit more leaning to something new, like All the Love You Can Give, which was written by Nicky Virgilio, Black as Ink, which features all the different singers. So really, I think it's a fantastic record that I really adore. I think they really knocked it out of the park, and there's an easy chance for them to kind of get stuck in a rut because they have a very distinguished style that's is very British and very, much about history, and they have a very dialed in sound that I think was veering towards like, is this getting a bit repetitive, and how can we freshen this up? And I think this was the breath of life and freshness that the band needed to kind of carry forward and do something a little bit fun and different. So that was a great record. And then I've got another good one here that it's up against is Cyan, for King and Country, which is an interesting record as well. This is a project from Rob Reed, who's also the kind of genius behind Magenta. This was an album that was produced way back when, in like the late 80s, early 90s period that he worked on, and he's kind of bringing it forward into a new era here with a new lineup, a new band, and it really freshens up the material and brings something new to it. They put a lot of new sections into it and really like dialed into a new sound. So it sounds like kind of that classic symphonic prog that Rob Reed is kind of known for. Really the secret sauce on this is Peter Jones' vocals, which really brings the music to another level, I think. And, it's a cool blend of like that classic symphonic prog, but also kind of a bit of kind of poppy melodies and a lot of kind of, it reminds me of maybe 80s style material, So maybe it can sound a bit dated at times, but I think that kind of adds to its charm a little bit. But the vocals of Pete Jones really connect with me. I could hear him sing forever. His voice just is really magical. So I really, really enjoyed this a lot. It has a couple epics. The opening track, The Sorcerer, is just a standout, fantastic track that really showcased the lineup at its best. There's great playing. Luke Machin, who's on this, is a great guitar player who's worked with The Tangent and his own group, Machine. Really great stuff. It's a standout record that I really liked and really highly recommend to all lovers of progressive rock. It just is right in that lane of just that classic progressive rock sound, like it could be plucked from that 70s era with a little bit of a tinge of this kind of 80s sensibility to me, of that kind of neo-prog with a little bit of a pop edge that kind of evokes that kind of a time period. So this is a really tough battle, but I probably predictably, I'm going to have to give it the edge to Big Big Train here, just because I thought this was a great album by the band. They were struck with a lot of, tragedy this year, and it's been a tough time for them. But before kind of the main events of that tragedy of David Lungden's passing, this was just a really bright spot of the year and really is a great kind of showcase for the group and their tenacity and their ability to kind of carry forward with this project, even though there were a lot of different elements that were against them through the pandemic and such. So felt like a little bit of a victory, and that was really exciting. Just felt like, they were breaking through once again. And so I really appreciate that. The Cyan album is incredible, but like I said, it's maybe loses a couple points because of that it's based on an album that came out before. It's kind of a redone material instead of newer, fresher material like the Big Big Train. Of course, they did a lot of new things with it and brought a lot of new elements, but I'm kind of more excited to see what the future holds for Cyan. That's kind of more the fun of the album, is like this portent for what could happen with this group when they craft their own material and maybe bring some creative from the different disparate members of the group. So they have the potential to do really well in a future style bracket with a future album, but I think for now the Big Big Train album is superior to it, in my opinion, just from what I enjoyed more throughout the year. So I'm going to move on Big Big Train. So I'm just going to run through the rest of these battles and see what comes out triumphant as the winner. I'll try to do this more quickly since I've talked through each of the albums already at this point. So let's get into it. Let's see what the determination is. And this is hard. So we've got Dream Theater versus Mir. Dream Theater, of course, is the bigger name of these two and had quite a notable release. It was a really great album. Like I've been talking about, kind of a return to form in a little bit. I think it's a lot better than their last couple records. Their best since A Dramatic Turn of Events, and maybe even back farther, depending on your own preferences. But it's definitely one of the strongest albums of the Mangini era, and I like the overt just progressiveness of it. Mir is the surprise discovery of the year for me, a band that I didn't know I would like this much, and it just really struck a chord with me, and I just love the style. I think it's a really beautiful album. Every track is strong to me, and I just think they just have such an interesting style that's unlike pretty much all these other bands that I've mentioned. So because of that, I'm going to move on Mir. Maybe it's a little bit unexpected, but I think that album touched me a bit more, and I put a lot of stake into that kind of surprise factor of an album that just comes out of nowhere and really speaks to me, whereas some of these other albums are by established artists that I already kind of know I'm going to like it as a baseline. So but when I place it within the framework of their whole catalog, maybe it is in the middle or lower, so it's not quite as exciting to honor it, I guess, as it is to honor this kind of new, exciting band that I discovered that I'm really excited to continue following. So I'm going to put Mir ahead in this battle. All right, so next we've got the Neil Morse Band versus Leprous, Aphelion. So these are both great records. Of course, my love of Neil Morse Band is well established at this point. I think they're one of the greatest current bands on the planet right now. I really gave a gushing review of Innocence in Danger, and I love the scope of it, and just there's so much there to appreciate and enjoy. I think it's them kind of firing all cylinders and doing a lot of collaboration that makes for a lot of excitement. It's just really good, solid symphonic prog that I think is just easily digestible, but really impressive and expansive, and it just does so many things. The Leprous album I really appreciate. It has a certain vibe and mood that I really connect with. I love the vocals are just so expressive and passionate and emotional, and I love kind of the grooviness of it. There's kind of, there's slower builds, and then it kind of pops in this big, almost cinematic, theatrical way. It really deals with some really darker themes, some like kind of feelings of depression and sadness. And so it's closer than you might expect, but I do think I'm going to have to go with the Neil Morse Band. I just think the scope of the project, that it's a double disc and that it works so well, all the pieces. I love the two epics like dearly. I think they're two of Neil Morse's best epics in his catalog, which is saying a lot because there's so many epics to choose from. But he really knocked it out of the park, and so I'm going to put Neil Morse Band ahead in this case. Alright, so now we get to Transatlantic, The Absolute Universe versus Frost Day and Age. Once again, another really tough battle. I love both these records dearly. They're probably both really in my top 5 of the year, I would say. So this is kind of a neck and neck type of situation. Transatlantic is, of course, the super group that really brought me into the modern prog realm. So, of course, very close and near to my heart. Frost has been a band that I've loved since the Million Town record way back when. So they're both bands that have been with me for a long time and that I have a lot of favoritism towards. I love the Frost record. I think it sounds very fresh and modern. I love how they blend kind of this classic prog influence, but do it in a more modern, I don't know if I'd say poppy completely, but there's kind of a sheen around it, around the production, around the vocals, that give it kind of a modern, fresh edge to it that I really appreciate. There's a lot of great tracks here that I think are really well constructed. I love Kill the Orchestra. I think it's a great conclusion towards the end of the album. Transatlantic's The Absolute Universe is just such an expansive project. There's so much to it that goes through so many different things and has so many great pieces to it. Just the fact that they pulled it off is just really something super impressive. So I'm going to have to give the edge to Transatlantic. I think they really knocked it out of the park here and did something really magical that's hard to replicate, that's hard, it's this bringing together of these really, really exciting prog legends, and the magic that ensues is hard to replicate and is hard to find elsewhere. So to me, it has to be Transatlantic moving on in this round. All right, so now we get to Hungry Heart versus Big Big Train here. Smalltape, like I said not too long ago, is a very fresh, unique, cool record that just has a lot of great different elements to it. It sounds a lot different than most of the prog I listen to. It kind of has its own unique lane and unique style. I think it gets points for that, for the fact that it's so unique and different. Brings elements of jazz and classical, but also some proggy stuff. And I just think the main artist here really brought something really unique and creative to the table that has a lot of artistic merit. But Big Big Train is really close and near and dear to my heart. And I think this is honestly a great record from them. I think they really knocked it out of the park. I think they're just a fantastic band that really deserves a lot of accolades and kudos for what they do in this realm. And the way that they were kind of pulled out from the ashes of this kind of bad situation with the pandemic and with various members kind of leaving the group is just such a great feat. And it's just such a positive, good record that makes me feel good. And to me, it's one of the bright spots of a dark time, And I just like the idea of honoring David Lungden and his contributions, because he does such a fantastic job here on the vocals and on the songwriting for the songs that he wrote on here. So I'm going to move on Big Big Train here pretty easily. I think they deserve the spot here. So now we're down to the final 4, and really this works out great because I would say this is my top 4 albums of the year easily. So these are the ones that meant the most to me. Mirror, Neil Morse Band, Transatlantic, and Big Big Train. Probably not too surprising if you've been watching my shows all this time. These albums really connected to me deeper than most of the other albums that I've heard. So basically we've got 2 pretty clear battles here. So at the top level, we've got Mirror versus Transatlantic. And this is tougher than you might think. You may think this is an easy win for Transatlantic because they're the established heavyweight band. It features Neil Morse, who I'm a super fan of. But it's not quite that easy because, like I said, Mir is one of my biggest discoveries of the year, and I really place a lot of weight to that because my whole experience with music is I'm always searching for the next thing. I'm always searching for my next favorite band, my next favorite album. That's kind of my pursuit as a music fan. I don't like to just sit on the bands that I know and love and just, as much as I love their material and could re-listen to their albums forever and be content, what really gets me going and why I talk so excitedly about all these different albums that I review and such is discovering something new that I hadn't heard before, that brings something new to the table, that really excites me in a special way, and something that I feel motivated to share with everybody. And that to me is the Mir album this year. It's such a cool album. Every track I really love. I love the sound of it. It has this kind of indie kind of vibe to it. It's not totally full-blown progressive rock, but it has this kind of orchestral chamber pop kind of feel, some great vocals, but there's little prog flourishes, just enough to keep it interesting, but it's beautiful and delicate, and there's just so many great melodies, and it's unique and special, and I'm honestly gonna give the edge to Mir on this battle. As much as I just totally am enamored with Transatlantic, I think it gets marred just slightly because it's kind of funny because what's its greatest strength is maybe also its greatest downfall, is that it gets a little confusing when there's so many different versions and so many different iterations of it. It's like it's hard for me to come to terms with what's the better version, Breath of Life, Forevermore, some mixture of the two, and ultimately comes down to there's things I like more about the Breath of Life version, there's things I like more about the Forevermore version, and thus both one have their flaws, and it's hard to really reconcile that and come up with an ultimate version. I feel like there was some friction with the group when they created this. I'm not sure I totally love the idea that they kind of broke apart and made two different versions of the album. I like the idea as kind of this big prog concept, but I don't like the idea that Neil Morse and Roy Stoll or whoever were butting heads and couldn't agree, and that this album was kind of brought together from this kind of conflict. Is kind of always an idea that has really been kind of a difficult one for me to think about. And maybe that's a little bit extreme. They probably weren't as much in conflict as I may imagine they were, but that's kind of how I think about it, and that's kind of odd to me that these musicians I really love and want to see unified kind of felt very differently about this album, and thus I'm not sure which version to follow. It's like you have to pick sides, of this marriage, and I just don't really like that aspect of it. But the music on display is incredible. I love the Mir discovery, whereas the Transatlantic one, I think this probably sits in the middle of their catalog. I prefer The Whirlwind, I prefer Bridge Across Forever to this one. So there's better Transatlantic material, but it's excellent. I'm really nitpicking here. These are both great albums that I truly adore, so it's really splitting hairs. One could be over the other tomorrow, but I think I'm going to give it to Mir. As surprising as that may seem to the Neil Morse fanboy in me, I think it was the more intriguing release that did something a bit different that kind of blew me away and caught me by surprise. So moving on, Mir, to kind of the finale here. And now we've got another tough one, Neil Morse Band versus Big Big Train. To see both of these Neil Morse related projects in this final four showcases how much I love the group, of course. But when it comes to this battle, once again, the Neil Morse Band release Innocence and Danger is an incredible album. Both discs are strong. I love the epics. I love everything about it. I love all the music. There's so much great stuff to enjoy. The only thing that has always kind of made me unsure about it is the debate on, was it right to split it into two discs? Could they have made a stronger one-disc album that kind of combined the different elements? I don't know if I like having them separate. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I think it's cool because you kind of get your choice. Do you feel more in a poppier, shorter prog mood? You could listen to the Innocence disc. Do you feel like just listening to some mind-blowing epics? Just listen to the Danger disc. So it has that kind of quality, which is really cool. But at the same time, it's hard for me to reconcile the album as a whole. It feels a little bit like two separate parts Do they belong together? Sometimes I'm not sure. And sometimes I feel like the Epic's disc is a little bit stronger than the singles one. As much as I like most of the tracks on it, there's some that maybe don't hit as hard for me. I don't know. So it's like I said, it's splitting hairs. I love it overall. These nitpicks are really small. But the Big Train to me is perhaps a bit more consistent. I like it the whole way across. It kind of, in its own way, kind of has its two parts as well, interestingly enough. I feel like the first half is kind of them experimenting slightly with some new sounds and doing some more collaborative stuff, while as the second half is them kind of going back to their core style and doing kind of the classic Big Train thing. But I feel like it fits more to me for some reason. It feels like a whole piece, and I just really like the vibe and nature of it. I think the band really did something incredible in crafting it. But this is razor thin, man. It's really tough to decide between these two. But I think I'm going to give the edge just slightly to Big Train, just because of the year that they've had. Maybe it has more meaning to me because of David Lungden's passing. It was kind of the last he will be on the next record, Welcome to the Planet, but I almost feel like that's kind of a second part to this record, and he's not around for the release of it, which is unfortunate. So this was the main last album that he's kind of involved in the press of it, and the excitement of how it hit the charts, and just bringing new elements to the band, seeing them kind of spark in this new way. So I feel like just because of the year and because of how important it was for Big Train and me and my connection with them, and this was like my summer record. I listened to this constantly, never tired of it. I love every piece of it. Atlantic Cable is one of my favorite tracks of the year. I love Apollo. It's a great showcase for the whole group. And some of these other shorter tracks are excellent. I love Nick's contribution. It's a really great record that just really touched my heart, and I'm going to put it in that spot. Hard to believe, huh? But here it is. This is Big Train. So now we come to the finale, and I'm kind of blown away. I didn't even expect, I thought when I constructed this, I was like, people are going to be so annoyed because it's just going to be Neil Morse Band versus Transatlantic. It's like, what flavor of Neil Morse do you prefer? That was kind of where it was headed in my mind at first. But I kind of went a different direction, because as much as I love both those Neil Morse records and think they're top tier, records that he's involved in, and they're probably my 1 and 2 favorite bands on earth right now. Overall, I feel like they're not really at the top level of their catalog necessarily. Like, as much as I love Innocence and Danger, I probably prefer the duology of Similitude and Great Adventure. So this was maybe a slight letdown compared to those. But I know the band really wanted to just do a collection of songs and not a concept record, but it's really the concept records that shine for me with them. And Absolute Universe, like I was talking about, I feel like there was some conflict there. Some of the pieces work really well, and some maybe aren't as well connected, and there's disparate versions and different opinions about what should be on the album and such. But overall, it's like razor thin. That could be my favorite album. If I did this show again tomorrow, maybe I'd pick Transatlantic as my favorite album. I don't know. Maybe I'd pick Neil Morse Band. Any of these, even you throw in Frost in there, those 5 records really are probably high and away the best records to me of the year. But here we are. I have to get into the meat of this battle, which is Mir versus Big Train. Tough one, once again. Talked these already through to death, so I'm not gonna go back into that, but really it boils down to Mir being this great discovery and Big Train being this great statement for a band that I know and love, that they're doing something fresh and exciting and continuing when all the odds were stacked against them, and the sentimental kind of feeling because of David Lungden and his passing, and just how I've really dig deep into Big Train this year and feel a special connection to them. So it almost feels like a personal kind of choice that Big Train was almost the band of the year for me because of all the stuff I covered with them on the news stuff, and just the journey that I took with them, both big heights and big lows. It's just been quite a year with Big Train for that reason. But I am going to give the edge to Mir. I know that's probably maybe strange, but I think I have to award Mir my favorite album of the year. Mir Playing House is going to be my album of 2021. It's just, I love discovering new music, and nothing connected with me quite the same way as this did, because as much as the Transatlantic and the Big Big Train and Neil Morse Band and even Frost all connected with me very deeply, I don't think it's the best records by any of these collective artists, you know. They're solid ones and great ones in their catalog, but I could point to other ones that were higher heights for the band. So that's why I kind of give the edge to Mir, a band that this is my favorite record from them, mainly because it's the only record I know from them. But it has such a special placement because it's something special that grabbed me, that gripped me, that really spoke to me emotionally, that really spoke to that feeling of discovery and excitement, just discovering a new great band. And I loved recommending it. And some people even have told me, oh, this was a great recommendation. I have really gotten into Mir. So it's really been an album that's really spoken to me. It may not be what was expected. Looking at this list, I wouldn't have really pegged this. I probably would have thought Transatlantic would trump Mir at some point in the tournament, but I think this is kind of a cool little ending to the story. So I'm going to pull that one there and give them their spot in the middle. This is my tournament. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this style. I wanted to do something a little different. I know it's not typical. Usually you get kind of a list of albums, but I thought it would be fun to just kind of do it in a different style. It's really hard to rank these. You know, it's really almost becomes arbitrary of what do I like more, this or this. So I thought I'd do it in a fun format so you could kind of see that thought process in action. You know, maybe this became too long of a video, I'm not sure, but I think it's interesting. So hopefully you guys like it. Like I said in the description, I'll give a more standard kind of list of my top 16, but I feel pretty good about these 16 records. I recommend all of them. They're all fantastic, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And remember, it's my favorites, my choices. You probably didn't agree with certain matchups, but that's the nature of the beast. Everyone's going to have different favorites. This is just how I feel in this moment, and that's what I wanted to do with this show. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Please subscribe if you like what I do here. This is kind of the final show of the year. Kind of wanted to shout out everybody and all that you guys have done for me. I started this channel in April, and it's grown to such a level I didn't anticipate. I'm really happy with it. Hope to continue to grow more into the next year and try to do some more fun, exciting things that bring more attention to this great music, because that's really what it's all about in the end, is wanting to give these artists the attention they deserve, because in the mainstream, these artists are pretty much no names. You know, these are albums that most people didn't listen to this year and out in the regular world outside of our little prog bubble. And I just want to bring some awareness to that. So hopefully I did that in a small way. I know I'm kind of small potatoes compared to a lot of bigger YouTube channels and bigger people who promote prog music, but I try to give my own unique stamp, and hopefully that comes across. So thank you guys so much. Keep enjoying the music, as we always say, and please subscribe if you haven't yet. I can't imagine getting this far into a video and not being a subscriber, but you never know. So please subscribe and join me on this journey, and tell me in the comments what your favorite albums were and how you feel about some of the choices I made here. So thank you guys so much. You really are so great out there. I'm just so grateful for everyone out there and all you guys do. So thank you so much, and hopefully I'll catch you guys soon in another video. Bye.